Okay, this is the first of many online lectures that I will do. I will do more of them second semester when we're working in the Bible, and I want to work with you in the Bible if you're having trouble being able to understand the material or process it. And so I'll have you do more lectures online next time. If we ever end up having a snow day or an ice day, we might declare it a digital learning day, in which case I might put an online lecture on and have you watch it and take notes and submit a picture of your notes. So find a fresh piece of paper and start taking some notes. You want to be neat and detailed. Other students will be reading this. Please leave your name off of the page, and you will be evaluating each other on the quality of your notes. You're going to take a picture of the notes when you're done and submit them to Canvas. Spent some energy in class on Thursday talking about faith as a general principle, that all people have faith and that faith is what drives our life. And I want to drill down and get more specific. Some big words to cover. The first one is nihilism. And literally, nihilism means belief in nothing or no faith. A person who is nihilistic essentially has nothing that drives their life, nothing that gives their life meaning and direction. And at least in theory, if somebody is truly a nihilist, they would find no purpose in going on in life and would commit suicide. Although not everybody who commits suicide does so because they're nihilistic. That's a complex topic. Nihilists, like Friedrich Nietzsche, were big thinkers, and Friedrich Nietzsche, instead of being somebody who thought that life was totally meaningless, thought it was worth writing books about how there was no meaning to life. So nihilism isn't really a faith, it's kind of the absence of faith or the lack of faith. Nihil means nothing. To annihilate means to make nothing. Agnosticism has two roots. A means without or not, and gnosis means knowledge. And a person who is agnostic is somebody who's not sure what their faith is. They aren't sure what gives their life meaning and direction. And in the textbook work that you did, there was discussion of different stages of faith. And adolescent faith, by its nature, is at least somewhat agnostic. You've been raised with certain beliefs. You're going through a process of questioning them, and so many teenagers would identify as agnostic. I'm not sure what I believe. I've heard this, I believe this in the past, I've been taught this, I'm curious about this. So agnostic faith is not really sure or not knowing what one's faith is. Those aren't necessarily faith systems by themselves, but they're related to the whole concept of faith. There are two main categories of faith. There's religious faith and non-religious faith. And on the slide here, I'm going to put non-religious faith off to the right, but you don't have to put it that way. But maybe leave some room on the right-hand side of the screen to write some more if you like to duplicate what a teacher does. Religious faith is faith that's centered on some sort of divine being, some sort of supernatural being. And there's two main types of religious faith: polytheism and monotheism. And polytheism used to be the dominant form of religious faith throughout the world. We'll talk about the shift from polytheism to monolatry and to monotheism much later in the class. But for our purposes here, poly means many. And a polytheistic system, theos means God, a polytheistic system assumes that there are many gods running the universe. And none of them really have absolute power. They each have their own little segment of the world they control. So you have a sea god and a crop god and a god of war and a goddess of love. And you might have one god who's nominally in charge, but really there's this idea that there are many different forces out there that control the world. Monotheism, mono means one, God. Monotheism is the belief that there is one God in control of everything, one God who is supreme above all. And just as polytheism was the predominant type of religious faith for thousands of years, monotheism is the dominant sort of faith today. There are even Hindus who will say that they are monotheistic, and the different gods like Krishna and Kali and Vishnu are different manifestations of the one divine reality. But that's a little more than you need to know. If you want to know more, talk to Mr. Ward. He knows a lot about Eastern religions, and definitely take world religions as a senior elective. Excuse me. The other main type of faith is non-religious faith. And I'm going to give you two terms that really are not faith systems at all, but again, like nihilism and agnosticism, they're related to the whole concept of faith. And the first one is atheism. Again, a means not or without, and theos means God. So an atheist is a person who believes that there is no God. There is no such thing as God. The world came into being through a series of random events, the Big Bang, things like that, evolution, and there's nothing behind it, no creator behind it. We'll talk about religious people and things like the Big Bang later, but for now, I just want you to know that atheists don't believe there's God. And atheism itself is not really a faith. It's not something that gets you out of bed in the morning. It's not something that drives one's life. But it is a cognitive decision to say there is no God. Similarly, deism is a belief system in which one believes that there is a God who created the world, and a God who started everything, but a God who's not involved in the world. So a monotheist believes that there is a God who's in control, and we're supposed to obey that God. We're supposed to come to know and serve that God, or gods if you're polytheistic. A deist would say, well, there's a God out there, but God doesn't care about us, and so it doesn't really matter how we behave. A monotheist might say if you don't behave the way God wants, then there's some sort of punishment, or you won't achieve enlightenment. A deist says God doesn't care how we live our lives. There's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no reincarnation. God created the Big Bang, God set the universe in motion, but God doesn't care. So in a way, deism is kind of like atheism. Whether you believe that God started the world and doesn't care about us, or there is no God, practically speaking, God doesn't play a role in your life as it does if you are a religious person. So it's not a faith system. You don't get out of bed in the morning saying, God made the world and this is how I'm going to live my life. But it is related to this concept of faith. Two words that you already should have definitions for, so you can be a little bit brief. The first is altruism. And altruism is a faith system, if you will, that can give meaning and direction to one's life. It's something that can get you out of bed in the morning. I'm going to get up because I want to bring education to people. I'm going to start my day because I'm interested in getting rid of the wage gap between women and men, or I'm looking forward to saving the rainforests. That an altruistic faith is a worldview, a faith system which is concerned about more than just oneself. It's concerned about helping people, or helping to save the earth, or helping to clean up the environment, or bring about positive political change. And two types of altruistic faith, which I discussed already, and which were on your Media 1 assignment, are humanitarianism and environmentalism. That there are people who don't believe in God, who do believe in trying to help humanity, or they're not sure if God exists, but they're concerned about saving the environment. They're about promoting education. They're about promoting healthcare. They're about saving endangered species. So they have a faith. They might believe that there's no God. They might believe that there's this clockmaker God, to use the term for deism. They might not know if there's a God, but there is something that gives their life meaning and direction. They're not nihilistic. There's no meaning to life. One word and the other word that I gave you is hedonism. And hedonism is the concept that it's all about oneself. And so there's people who don't believe in God, and they're all about feeding their own appetites. Or they're not sure if God exists, but they want to have the best toys. They are people who are focused on themselves, and that might take many forms. And again, on the test on Thursday, I'm going to ask you to match up different advertisements and different shows and different songs to these kinds of themes. There are people whose life is governed by trying to have sex with people, and lots of it, because that will bring their life meaning and direction. Or people for whom being famous or being powerful or being a star is their what gives their life meaning and direction, or owning things, or being about themselves. So you might believe that there is no God, you might believe in the watchmaker God, you might not be sure, but these kinds of things, if you will, are faith systems that people pursue, and they're things that give people meaning and direction. They get them out of bed in the morning. They're not worshiping a God, they're worshiping something, which leads to, and I'm going to skip this little blurb right here, which leads to two important words. People who have a religious faith and people who have a non-religious faith sometimes look at each other and they can't really understand each other. If I am a religious person and I look at people if I'm a non-religious person, if I'm an atheist, if I'm not sure that God exists, I look at people who have religious faith and I say, that's superstition, or you're superstitious. You are putting your faith in something that you can't see. You're putting your faith in something that you can't prove it exists. You believe in some God who inspired people to write a book thousands of years ago. I can't see your God, and so I can't really understand your worldview because I'm concerned about this political system, or I'm concerned about saving natural resources. I'm concerned about getting the best gadgets, or I'm concerned about getting my needs met right now. And so I don't really understand your faith. And from the same standpoint, people with a religious faith look at people who have a non-religious faith and they say, that's idolatry. Your ultimate concern is owning technology, which gets outdated every year or so. Your faith is based on being famous, which is something that comes and goes. Your faith is in owning things, or green pieces of paper that lose their value and are not permanent. And so that's idolatry. You're treating things that aren't ultimate as though they're ultimate. We worship a God because that God is the ultimate, and I can't point to that God and prove that that God exists, but my ultimate concern is something ultimate, and your ultimate concern is not something ultimate. And again, by the same token, people who have a non-religious faith say, you're worshiping something I can't see. I can count my dollar bills. I can, count my sexual conquests. I can measure my number of Instagram followers, or how popular my Twitter feed is. I can measure the amount of things that I own. And for me to put my faith in something that I can't see or touch seems rather silly. I will actually go back to that term. The word humanism is a specific belief system for people who don't believe in God, but they believe in helping out humanity. And students or people sometimes confuse the term humanitarian versus humanism. And humanism itself is almost like a religion. They even have their own symbols, which we'll talk about those later. They believe that there is no God and believe in helping humanity. And it's different than humanitarianism as a general principle.